Cable, Cable.
First map, Team Marsy, pre-Marsy of course, who are the #1. They won the 2017 Mythic Dungeon Invitational. They are the only and defending champions, and they're up against Gulch Trotters, who definitely were one of the strongest teams yesterday. The only team, in fact, to win their series 2-0 on that losers map. It's going to be a very interesting one to kick us off today.
Jack, I think right off the bat we're going to see what we see, and we're seeing it right away with both teams immediately popping those invis pods going up the right side. I can't remember the last time I've ever seen any of these teams actually opt to kill the trash leading up to the first boss. Nonetheless, they do all now have that 10-minute cooldown on their pots, though.
That's right, yeah. The 10-minute cooldown on any potions that the invisibility pot actually does put out there. We've actually seen one time, I believe, from last MDI where everyone rolled Night Elves, everyone played Alliance just to be able to drop combat and immediately get out of it. But as you're seeing, everyone's taking advantage of the invisibility potions. It's much faster than, of course, having everyone death run and then just having the healer res up, because that that huge deficit that you are going to be having from those extra deaths can just be such a pain to deal with later on.
Gulch Trotters, of course, pulling the boss slightly before free Marsy here, but both of them having nothing on the trash count. Now, with this boss, Jack, we'd have to discuss some of the abilities as we always do, just really briefly. We do have that frontal tank hit that the tank must avoid 180-degree cone, making sure that they pointed away from the group. We also have these spirits that spawn on players with the swirlies that you see on both the screens right now. If you get caught in those explosions after they're laid down by a few seconds, they will fear any player and hit them for some damage. We also have that scythe going out, but most importantly, Jack, at 50% mark, the boss will go to the middle of the room and spawn 8 spirits around the edges of the room.
That's right, and having to be able to neutralize all of those spirits before they actually get absorbed by the boss. If they are absorbed by the boss, then they will then just increase the damage from his soul burst, just a huge party-wide nuke that goes out on the raid, and any kind of increases in damage, just another death that you really don't want to be having. So it's nice to see Zerace actually switching to his Resto Druid for this for these 23s here. He was playing Paladin again when we were in the 22 bracket. It was nice to be able to see he's going to be playing Druid here. He will also have the ability to get Entangling Roots out onto one of those spirits, and that'll allow the team to be able to hold on to that one spirit, keep on DPSing the boss until about 15%.
Right, you are, Jack. Both teams doing essentially the same thing, where they wait for the spirits to come and just a bit closer. Similar to actually Agrimar and raiding for all of those raiders out there. Then they AoE group the spirits together near the amalgam, making sure to cleave them down prior to the boss absorbing any of them, because of course if he does get that increased 100% damage to the rest of the to the raid at 15%. Once he transitions, we can see that both spirits are rooted there on the side. Players will have to pop likely some type of small personal, especially in this 23 tyrannical setting, to make sure that they don't get one shot at 15% when the amalgam does explode.
That's right, and you're seeing, of course, both teams have pretty even damage going out overall. Very, very important to be able to make sure, Bear Form, Divine Shield, any, your larger personals to be able to be popped and at the ready, making sure that you're able to just survive these defensives, as you're seeing Gulch Trotters and Free Marsy's Soul Burst going out at about the same time. You are seeing Chompy and Tech going down as well, where you're saying Free Marsy having everybody survive from it. It can just be such a huge amount of burst damage, and while the checkpoint is still there, just those extra deaths you really can't have.
Now, of course, that is not the bursting affix that we're talking about. That was just a huge burst of damage on the group. Techmonk going down. Group opting, I think intelligently here, not to use that battle res. The boss was already obviously 15% by the time that the death came in on Techmonk, so they're able to just, finish the boss off, get the checkpoint here, and then get ready to wait for this RP and then go up the stairs to the spiders.
That's right, and one of the scary things, because like I said, we are on that bursting affix, is going to be going up those stairs, dealing with those spiders, because they can just, it's so easily how they're able to stack up those bursting and very, very quickly. So you might see some teams who are kind of just having some of their members outrange it if they're not going to be able to have, very large-scale defensives to be able to handle it, or you might just see, a lot of personal being popped, a lot of big CDs coming out from the healers there.
You also have to consider that these are spiders, sometimes quite spooky for me in the meantime, but we do have to also say that as they go upstairs, we do have a lot of groups that sometimes pull all the way up to the big spider, or they opt to kind of curl back around as the DPS wait for them at the bottom. And Jack, I didn't want to say it, I've been keeping an eye on it the whole time, but we don't have a single mage in these groups, so we're not going to see any of the usual, Arcanist stuff going on upstairs and some big damage coming in.
That's right. One of the things we were, quite captivated by was seeing, the little mage tricks there to be able to pump up the extra damage there. But a lot of times you were able to see just a long setup time that was being taken advantage of it. And one of the nice things is because we have that exact same scenario, the exact same affixes for different regions to be able to play against, we'll be able to compare how these teams are performing if they are using the mage trick versus if they're not.
We do have another death over on Gulch Trotters. Once again, the Windwalker Monk unfortunately does release back at the checkpoint, still hanging on to that battle res as they fight back in. Both teams now working on this really big spider, but of course our Australian players are no stranger to these big spiders, so quite well they're doing tanking in the meantime.
Yeah, but you're seeing, no fear of the spiders there as they are about to die. They are pulling them into the first patrol that is just right outside of, this little hallway leading up to the second boss. Very important to, get those pulled, start dealing with them early on. You will have to deal with the scout and, of course, the champion. Scout will have the knife dance you need to be interrupting, whereas the champion will have that bone-breaking strike, that cone in front that will just stun all players and deal a hefty amount of damage.
Now, it is important to note as well that these interrupts do have to be hard interrupts. They have to be displacements, disorients, stuns. You can't just kick them, which leads to a lot of groups actually failing to do this because they just don't have enough checks. These groups should have no difficulty with them, depending on how fast they kill them again. Now, the next hall is really where we're going to have to talk a lot about some of the dangerous trash coming up and how risky some of the pulls are. We will see the advantage, of course, of the blood DKs being able to usually, of course, since we don't have mages, there's no arcanists involved here, but usually try to mind control or control undead on the cat.
That's right, and you're seeing here as Brath is moving in, making sure he's taking care of the first pack, and he's looking like he's, like you just said, going into the next patrols and actually getting everything grouped up in here together. You're seeing everybody standing back, making sure they're having that line of sight as the tank's able to get aggro, immediately getting the Chaos Nova down from the Demon Hunter there, following it up, probably going to be with the leg sweep, making sure you're getting as much damage out as possible before, of course, the extra stamina buffs are coming out from the champions.
They actually opt not to control undead on the cat in this case, but the Gulch Trotters as well with a huge similar pull on the other side, on the right side of the screen in the meantime. A lot of arrow barrages going out. Just make sure you want to move out of the way for those. They do jump and target a player, but once they do that, they are stationary and can just move out of the way. Jack, there is a lot of residual damage. You do see a death going down on Gulch Trotters for the Holy Paladin. Battle Res is down at the moment. Techmonk goes down. Chompy goes down as well. It's looking like a full team wipe going on Gulch Trotters. I believe the tank managed to survive as we could see their health still yo-yoing up and down, running down the stairs, but lots of deaths coming in.
Exactly right, and you're seeing Free Marsy there, just taking care of the trash pack so much more cleanly. Still have not had any deaths there. And they have been playing very aggressively, making sure that, for example, they're pulling that last champion into the commander. And making sure they're kind of keeping that distance there because of that commanding shout, which can just boost their HP and just make it so much more difficult to be able to deal with.
Oh, Jack, it is a pleasure to cast with you, too. That's why I usually have a good laugh. Now, Commander Shamalama Ding Dong for Free Marsy has just jumped down now. We won't be really privy to the surprise ending that will happen once the commander does go down, but the gate leading up to the last pack before Ilisana, the second boss of the dungeon, will not open until the commander and the pack are dead. Gulch Trotters in the meantime trying to... I think they've salvaged most of the pull here. The players did release right away and jump back up while the tank managed to hang on, so we are at, unfortunately, a 7-death differential between the two teams. That's 35 seconds is a lot.
It has made a huge difference, and even, Free Marsy can even attest to how big of a difference it has made for them in their own games, right? So being on the other side of it, making sure that they have, those perfect clean pulls. They still have a battle res, for example, while Gulch Trotters does not, can be, make a world of difference, especially as, like you said, we're going on to Ilisana, it can be quite lethal.
So we do see Gulch Trotters has indeed control undead on that cat. It is a particularly dangerous mob as it will leap to distant players, cleaving the area and applying a dot. So you want to make sure you either kill it really quickly. In the case of Free Marsy, that's what they did. They grouped everything together and just nuked it all down, whereas Gulch Trotters opted to go for a more controlled approach. But unfortunately, they were also put on the defensive because of their deaths. So everything had to kind of slow down as Skylar needed to kite backwards and stay safe. We see Free Marsy now on the left side of the screen working on the last pack before Ilisana.
That's right, and you're seeing here with the positioning, a lot of times you will see, of course, a lot of your range DPS, or if you're running, for example, an all-range composition, which can be very favorable when you're pushing keys like this, being able to outrange a lot of these archers and just having all the physical damage, for example, from the archers just funneling into the tank. But as you're seeing when you're having these double melee comps on both sides, both teams running with a Havoc and with Windwalker, a lot of times you want to make sure everybody is getting in, everyone's going to be in range of the archers. That way you're going to be just reducing the odds of any kind of double shots going on to one person and just snuffing out their life very quickly. So that's why you're seeing these more tighter positions here.
So let's talk about Ilisana for a second here. This boss is already quite dangerous in the tyrannical setting. We have those brutal glaives going out on the ranged players, bouncing between them, applying a pretty heavy dot. We have the Vengeful Shear on the tank. Want to make sure your active mitigation is up, otherwise you will incur a 30-second debuff for 100% increased damage taken, and also that fell charge, probably the most lethal part of the entire fight. 3 players will get targeted, as we can see on the left side of the screen right now. They do well to form a small triangle around the boss as to limit the amount of real estate that gets taken away from the playfield. Now, importantly as well, as we are in the Grievous setting, and there's a lot of dot damage going on as well, Jack.
That's right, and one of the most scary things is having, of course, to deal with that Brutal Glaive there. You do have the opportunity, the option, as, for example, as a Resto Druid, to be able to hop into bear form to try to get that dodge out really quickly, to be able to dodge that Brutal Glaive before it goes out. Otherwise, if you're not able to get the dodge on it, which I said is just a chance to, you will have to be dealing not only with a Brutal Glaive dot, which is very, very constant and is very heavy, as you're seeing just constant damage going out into this race there, but you also have to deal with the stacking Grievous. So a lot of times getting ahead of Grievous is making sure that you're able to have as much preparation as possible, isolate those Grievous stacks, take care of them, one at a time if need be, making sure that you're reducing them before at the 3 or 4 before they start getting out to 5.
We do have to, of course, deal with another Arcanist and one of the Bone Crushers in the meantime, making sure that you dodge that frontal and interrupt the Arcanist in this case. I mean, every successful cast that goes through, as we saw in previous series, the reason the mages were brought in the first place, increases the damage of that Arcanist. They're doing well, of course, CC it in the corner. Ravencrest does jump back down and restarting phase 1 for free Marsy. On the right side, Gulch Trotters still working on Ilsana. She's starting a transition phase now, but, I mean, they're quite a bit behind on the boss, and then we still have the 7 death issue. They also have 0 battle reses on the board. Free Marsy still has theirs.
That's right, and having that extra battle res, especially as we're going to be seeing the next Fel Rush there coming out of Ilzana, can be just so lethal, making sure they're having just a very strong triangle. They're popping defensives to be able to avoid any of those extra little double ticks. The next glaive is, again, going out onto air there, so just be able to have the constant drain life. And as a healer, that's really what you want to be able to have. You know, one of your more resilient DPSers being able to deal with a glaive, being able to heal themselves for just such a huge amount, makes life so much easier and puts a lot less stress on your healer.
Ilsana down to 25% now for free Marsy. I don't think she'll enter a second transition phase at this point. Probably they will be able to down her, of course, getting that checkpoint here on the dungeon. So if any players die for the rest of the series, or the rest of the dungeon rather, coming up, they can release this point until they kill the 3rd boss. A lot of checkpoints in this dungeon. We do see Bloodlaws being popped over on Gulch Trotter's side in the meantime, and free Marsy still holding on to theirs, likely for either the 3rd boss or the massive pull that we're probably going to see with the Blade Lords upstairs leading up to the Gauntlet.
That's right, and it also is a testament to just the excellent job they've been doing, you know, as a group to be able to reduce the damage that they're taking. You know, you're seeing Race here dealing with 2 different Brutal Glaives all at the same time, so a lot of his focus has been on healing, on playing, you know, a lot more safely here to be able to deal with, you know, both Glaives, isolating and eliminating the Grievous as rapidly as possible there, and just a very, very clean pull. And as you're seeing, you know, when they're not able to have Bloodlust there, you know, on a boss that's usually quite terrifying, they do a great job there, making sure that they're able to deal with all the mechanics, having strong positioning, not, you know, covering the entire room in any of the I-beam. That'll just be denying so much movement.
Free Marsy now going up the stairs with, of course, those Rolling Stones, not the popular musicians that we're all used to, but these ones will actually kill you horribly, so you want to make sure that you're dodging them along the staircase. The big pull that we typically see coming out of all these groups, everything down on this lower floor, including the Blade Lords, which are particularly dangerous as they will cast that assault, the brutal assault on the tank, which needs to be interrupted after the cast is done as soon as the channel starts, else they will just start recasting it right away. And a couple of those on Free Marsy did indeed get interrupted during the channel, so we're going to see a lot of damage going out on the tank if there's no CD spot. Pretty safe there in the meantime. We do start some kiting from the tank in the meantime, making sure that they play it safe and they don't have any fatalities.
It's a fantastic job there, actually stopping DPS to make sure the bursting stacks were able to be healed up there. There's a phenomenal job here, and they're making sure they're not refreshing over it. So it was really nice that they had like 2 different waves of killing a lot of these scavenger mobs, because they do have pretty tight and close amounts of HP altogether. Making sure they're eliminating a bunch of them, calling the stop for DPS, making sure they're able to deal with the bursting ends, they're able to get the next set of mobs eliminated. And fantastic job there, and a very, very clean pull, and what is usually just a very hard pull to be able to pull off, especially if you're having to deal with the extra bursting stacks.
Now venturing up the 2nd staircase here, Free Marsy. Now, it is important to note for this staircase right now that the second one has a bit of RNG on which side the boulder spawns on, whereas the first one will spawn left, right, etc. Gulch Trotters dealing with their pull in the meantime as well. A lot of damage going in on the group with that bursting. They do well as well to stop, but they didn't finish all the small mobs like Free Marsy does. They will have kind of some more intermediary bursting stacks as well, Jack.
That's right, and you're able to see you actually are having the kite coming in for Gulch Trotters, making sure they're able to kind of get away from these mobs. And the bursting did refresh, so you are seeing, of course, the Holy Pally Dag going down. And very, very important here, at this point, now that all the bursting has actually fallen off, they're able to just cleave down the rest of the, you know, the Blade Lords here. But Free Marsy just continuing to pile onto their advantage as they're moving up to Smash Fight's room.
I very much thought you said the Holy Pally Dad, but then I realized it was a mistake. Free Marsy moving up with Free Marsy moving up with that gauntlet, pulling all of those Fel Lords up into the 3rd boss's room. Typically, we saw the Chinese teams do the entire gauntlet as well, but they chose to park in that kind of central lobby area, waiting for everything to come towards them so that they could pull some of those bats and use the rogue power to their advantage. Of course, there are no rogues on these teams.
Yeah, I know what it's like to wait for you in the lobby there, as Free Marsy here positioning themselves, getting ready to take on Smash Fight. And so nice to be able to deal with this, especially when you're able to have the Havoc team. And Hunter, you are going to be, of course, having that charge going out there. It needs to be soaked up by, you know, one person that'll be just continually packing on more and more stacks. You will then have just that ground pound, as you were seeing, just dropping arrows so low there.
Of course, Smashbite the Hateful, aptly named. Of course, you're the only hateful one here in the meantime. Smashbite, you do have to watch out for a few things on this boss. Once we do, as you did just mention, we do have that AoE stomp. We're in a tyrannical setting, a fair bit of damage on the group. We'll also target somebody in the group to charge them, which other players can intercept. whoever is the brunt of takes the brunt of that charge, excuse me, will get a debuff, taking increased damage from any future charges while getting so low there, taking any charges increased damage as well. Furthermore, the tank, the less you mitigate, the more energy he will gain, and then he will eventually do a huge strike on the tank, increasing their damage taken. So you want to mitigate as much as possible, getting that blood shield up as frequently as you can with Death Strike. Lastly, Jack, not anything to write home about. We do have that bat spooge on the side of the screen as well.
That is correct. And you're seeing as the team is, of course, rotating through different players to be able to soak up that charge there. You're seeing Zerace jumping into bear form there, being able to soak up the charge, being able to get himself topped off very quickly before, of course, the ground pound does come out. And you're seeing Brath, like you said, making sure he's having his mitigation up as often as possible, making sure he's really pooling death strikes, pulling up his runic power. That way he's able to quickly top himself off every single time, because Smash Fight definitely just deals some huge chunk damage to the tanks.
And it's important as a tank, as you're saying, to kind of pool and wait and do it at the right time, because there's a lot of downtime on this boss where he'll choose a charge target, do an AoE stomp where he's not actually meleeing the tank, so you want to use those resources wisely. Gulch Trotters trying to catch up here in the meantime. They have 68% on the boss, 84 on trash for both of them, but they're a fair bit behind. Not to mention now they've accrued those extra 2 deaths prior to the gauntlet, putting them at 9 deaths, so the 45-second deficit. We always get to this point in these matches, Jack, where they're just really hoping at this point that Free Marsy has a wipe.
And that's one of the things, is that while there is that larger deficit coming out here, any of these wipes, especially when we're on tyrannical bosses, especially as we're moving on to Xantalia next, the very last boss, can just be such a pain to deal with. But you also have to make sure, even if you do wipe, as we've seen in other games this week, if you do wipe, you need to get back in there, not falling into any extra tilt, get back into the game as rapidly as possible, because the exact same thing can happen to your opponent.
Tilt is not advisable. Absolutely. Smash Fight now 5% for Free Marsy. They should be able to finish and they just get so low from all these smashes. Smash Fight 2% now. After this, I will assume that they're going to pull the entire stairwell leading up to Kur'talos, the last boss, / Xantalia Nags. Of course, there's 2 different characters in that fight. We do see them rushing out. They have now gotten the checkpoint, of course, here after killing Smash Fight. So should they fail or die or wipe on the boss or the trash here, they will be able to release in Smash Fight's room.
Yeah, but you're seeing here the Skystep Potion coming out there for Brath, making sure he's able to get up to the top of the stairs as rapidly as possible here. And a lot of times you'll see, if you're going to be pushing keys, you want to be playing as safely as possible just to make the timer. A lot of times you'll try to move all these mobs down into Smash Fight's room. That way you'll have tons and tons of room to actually be able to work with. But with these speed runs, you have to be able to play aggressively. You have to be able to play in more confined areas and still performing. As you're seeing just the constant I-beams here coming out by Retro, just annihilating these mobs.
So 2 types of mobs here, as we're seeing with Free Marsy. We do have the Risen Lancers and also the Swordsman. The Swordsman will cast a coup de grace on the tank, which does a ton of damage right now. A lot of bursting stacks going on in the group that do manage to handle it. We also see, of course, that there has been a Control Undead on one of the Lancers, typically that we do see coming out of the Blood DKs in these groups, that they will release, they will use to their advantage on the boss, and then, of course, release to get that remaining 1% for the 100% trash.
That's right, and of course, as you're going to be engaging Kur'talos, you will have to deal with him just at a normal level of HP that you have to deal with. But Xantalia next, once you engage with him, you are increasing your health and damage, making it so much easier to be able to take down that last mob. So near the end of the boss fight, when you're having some little bit of downtime there, makes it so much easier. Just get that 1%, and you're getting a little bit extra damage in from the little mob that you're stealing.
Quite a daunting task indeed. Kur'talos, now, you don't actually have to kill him in order to get to the Xantalia Nags phase. You just have to get him to 20%, and then he will start his RP. Xantalia Nags will spawn. Now, the most crucial thing that we have to think about in this circumstance is, before the players get their 300% damage, health, and healing buff, he will do a Shadow Bolt AoE volley that will cause all of the players to take an immense amount of damage. So there will have to be some immunities and a lot of personals used, especially in this tyrannical setting.
That's right, and just in the instance, really starting the first boss, going to, and just like the first boss, and now with the end boss, there is that huge AoE group-wide burst. And one of the biggest things, you have to make sure that you are going to be getting everybody alive right after that goes out, because there will be the buff increasing all your health and damage and healing right afterwards. And if you do not receive that buff, then you will just be dying to all of the subsequent Shadow Bolt volleys coming out.
Yeah, so I have to keep an eye on the Windwalker here. They should have some personals available to them in the meantime, but probably one of the more vulnerable targets to that Shadow Bolt AoE volley. Now, a few of the abilities that we have to discuss on this boss, of course, there will be that Stinging Swarm that will randomly spawn on a player, which will really irritatingly, constantly stun you and do a ton of damage. Players will need to kill that really quickly. We'll also have a transition phase where you will have to dodge a chain of beams, either going clockwise or counterclockwise, as we saw in the first phase. And lastly, of course, we do have these clouds on the side of the screen. If you do step in them, you can't wake up.
Wake me up inside?
No, Jack, you can't wake up.
You sure you can't wake me up inside?
Save me!
That was horrible. Dentalion X now does disappear for about 20 seconds. After, of course, the players cannot DPS him during this time. Dots continue to take. Dentalion X will then reappear in the middle of the room, resuming his phase 1 abilities. Players will try to get out as much damage as possible, likely at 79% mark. I don't think, especially without that mage trick with the Arcanist, they won't be able to one-phase the rest of this fight. They will probably have to enter one more transitionary phase. Gulch Trotters on the right side of the screen working to just down Kur'talos right now and working to get started on Dentalion X.
That's right, and as you're seeing, like I said, playing so safely here, you are, of course, about to get their third battle res back available here for free Marsy, just making sure everyone's staying topped off. One of the most dangerous situations we really have to deal with when you're having that stinging swarm coming out is when you're going to be having the constant Shadow Bolt volleys that will be following along with it. So especially as a healer, when you're having those constant little stuns going out, the struggle to be able to continue healing yourself, healing the rest of the group, and dealing with that stinging swarm makes it just such a pain to deal with. So I believe you are going to see, if you're going out on Zerace, just being able to jump into bear form, using bark back onto himself, making sure he's keeping himself safe when that happens, because it can be such a daunting task really to be able to deal with.
A daunting task? Did you really just steal my own fun? Now, we should mention that Free Marsy's had an incredibly clean run here. Not a single death. All 3 battle reses available. I mean, it was just really well rehearsed for them, and it's showing in this match. They need a full wipe, probably ×2 at this point for Gulch Trotters to be able to win this map. They're 9 deaths behind, 45 seconds worth, and the run back to this boss really isn't that bad because we do have the checkpoint at Smash Spite. Dentalion X, as predicted by me, Jack, does of course disappear again at 31%, but after getting out of this quite simple transition phase, they seem to all know the direction between clockwise and counterclockwise. After getting out of this phase, they will be able to finish Dentalion X off and likely secure a 1-0 lead in this series in the upper bracket.
That's right, and at this point, it's making sure they're sticking to those fundamentals. They do have 3 battle reses left available to them, so it will just continue to be following those mechanics. Like you said, they're ending that last transition phase, 18% left onto the boss, just dealing as much damage as possible. And you are seeing, like I said, Zerace is just playing cleanly.
Tend to skip the entire balcony entirely. We do see here that both Blood DKs, of course, right away controlling Undead on that first Spirit. It's just such a time dump to single target DPS that thing down. It has so much health, so they're just going to bring it along for the ride, do what they do with the balconies here, and then release it during the Opera event, RP, and DPS it down there.
That's right. The first differing strategy that you're kind of seeing here is, well, actually, both teams are, having both of their healers, again, running ahead, making sure they're either stealthing past or using an invisibility potion to be able to get past a lot of this trash. They're going to be able to kill kind of whatever they can here, get a little bit of extra percent, and it's seeing Zerace just moving up to that Opera event there, making sure that he's able to, first start that Opera event, and just seeing just Gulch Trotters having everybody going down. Free Marsy clearing off just a little bit of trash. They're going to be using probably the rest of this trash to be able to go die on, as you're seeing Wrath going down, going into Purgatory there. Some of the throw coins, especially in a fortified setting, can just be so lethal to go with. So, you want to look at the healers here, starting, of course, the Opera event, making sure that's getting started, because it can take quite a bit of time. The res will then go out, and they'll be able to clear out a little bit more trash before they'll be able to engage with the boss.
Or as the Philanthropist can indeed spare some change. The healers now getting ready to mass res the players down right at the Opera event. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Jack, we will be starting with that Beauty and the Beast event, where we will have kind of 4 mobs for the boss, 4 mobs, including for the boss. Actually, we're backtracking for a bit of trash here before that, so we'll talk about that in just a moment here. Now, we do have to be careful with the pennies from heaven from these. We do see some swirlies spawning on the ground for the players that they'll have to avoid. Really lethal amount of damage, especially in a fortified setting, because there's just so many swirlies, and sometimes they superimpose on themselves because they go out so frequently as well.
Yeah, and when you're having these double melee comps, it can be so lethal to make sure that you're still being able to deal damage, still being able to get these mobs down and be able to fight against them. Wrath already popping its Purgatory here, and it's going to be such a pain to be able to deal with, especially as you're going later on into the instance. So they should be able to be fine once they're going to be going into, for example, this first boss fight. But as you're going a little bit later, it might be looking to see if they're going to get a quick reset there. That way they'll be able to kind of lean on that for some of the larger trash bowls.
Small percentage difference between the 2 teams, but there's a lot of trash to cover in this dungeon, so not too worried about that. Gulch Trotters now starting, of course, on the Opera event here, the Beauty and the Beast. It is important to note that before you get access to Coggleston, which is actually the last main boss of this series of mobs, you will have to pick which one you want to kill first, and as soon as you kill one of them, the other ones will heal up, so it's really ineffective unless it boosts your single target damage to be multi-dotting and cleaving these mobs.
Yeah, but you're seeing Bablet going down first for Team Free Marsy.
Actually, Techpoint went down first, if I'm not mistaken.
While they're trying to get Mrs. Cauldrons down for Gulch Trotters there. Difference in strategy, Bablet, of course, is the broom that will be just sweeping his way across the room, and if he ever touches any of the fire, he increases his speed, and when he actually reaches his target, he will disorient them. Mrs. Cauldrons will just cast a single target nuke that will just deal tons and tons of damage, but it will give you a little wet debuff that will allow you to kind of clean up some of these fire patches here.
Right you are, Jack. Luminar as well, quite a bit in the butt, is the one that actually spawns all these fire patches, opting to kill him second is Gulch Trotters on the right side of the screen, whilst Miss Cauldron on the left side with Free Marsy is being DPS down second. Luminar will follow, and of course Bablet will follow afterwards for Gulch Trotters. Then they will both get access to Coggleston, of course, at the end. Now, another death going down, and a lot of deaths going down for them. They will have to use that Battle Res. I mean, there's just so much damage left to be done on these mobs. A lot of real estate for the Warlock right now on Free Marsy on the left side of the screen. Important to note for Coggleston, a couple of notable abilities. There will be a cast on the tank that will increase the tank damage taken for a few seconds. You want to make sure you get that off, interrupt that. You will also have a buff, an AoE buff, that he will cast increased haste on his allies. Some of those, of course, the spoons that he summons.
Those are Forks 10, I believe.
Okay, Jack, I've seen you've played Spoony Forks before.
Did you see that? Free Marsy here taking down the last mob there in Luminor, while Gulch Trotters is already engaging, or sorry, he's taking down Coggleston as we speak here, taking care of the Forks, I believe, here.
Yeah, let's put a fork in this one. Coggleston down to 75%. Nothing too dangerous about him, but things can get pretty out of hand if you do let a lot of those casts go through, as those forks tend to stab you pretty hard and they actually leave a bleed on their current targets. A lot of damage could be coming in, not to mention that the longer you leave them up, the more of them there are, rather, as a result of leaving them up too long, you will get a ton of necrotic stacks on the tank. Really difficult to clear as you can't slow these bosses down.
That's right, more necrotic stacks, more bleeds going out. They really will be worse for the silverware here. You're seeing Free Marsy just doing whatever they can to kind of catch up. They do have quite a bit of a gap here between Coggleston going down at 50%, and while Gulch Trotters has already kind of cleared it out here and is working on to the rest of the Opera Trash.
Gulch Trotters showing themselves masterful dishwashers indeed as they head off to the backstage area, ready to round up a lot of these mobs together. Now, this is where we start talking about just how big some of these pull are. There's a really big pull coming out of Gulch Trotters here. This is really, they have to make sure that they constantly interrupt those Fireland portals cast. If any one of those go off, it is a huge nuke on the group and will likely result in a wipe. We do see a lot of the stagehands coming down as well. Massive pull here, and they'll have to be careful to start kiting right away for this necrotic. Free Marsy now moving backstage as well.
That's right, and you're seeing Gulch Trotters here taking care of all these large mobs. They are pulling everything from backstage down into the pit band here. One of the nice benefits you're getting is those little, it look like little solar beams, quite a bit brighter. They do offer a very, very large DPS increase. And Free Marsy here following the same exact pattern, making sure they're going to be able to get everything in together. There's the execution here just going to be so vital, as they are in very, very similar positions. Same amount of deaths. They did have both their monks go down during the boss fight. Retro is dropping down very, very early, and that's going to be one of the biggest scary things they have to deal with. They have no battle res left available, and they have such a short clock left on the tank to be able to get in there, deal some damage before he has to run for his life.
Right, you are. Gulch Trotters moving ahead, ushering in the new year with these ushers. Now, you do have to be careful with them, as they will cast that flashlight that will force you to turn around, because if you are facing them when the cast goes off, it will do extra damage to you and also disorient you. And should the tank get disoriented, he will lose aggro on all those mobs, and they will go around smacking people. They are not tauntable either, so you'll have to naturally get threat back on them should they drop aggro on you.
Yep, and you're having to see Retro there just having his quick death. He is just going to be positioning himself that he will be able to be hit by that mass res there. You know, you have the two options, for example, when you have your res point to be able to go back to, and because there's, one area that's completely covered by mobs, he needs to be able to get back with the rest of the groups. The best way for him to do that is, of course, just to expend, that extra mass, or to get that mass res out onto him to reach him across the room.
Impressive there from Free Marsy to be able to still recover after that really early death from the Demon Hunter. I mean, that's a really nasty pull. So luckily they pulled it off and don't have to do the alternate strat where they release and then go to Moroes' room first. So that'll save them a bit of time, although they overall, of course, they lost some time with those deaths. There is a 2-death differential between the two teams now as a result of that trash. Gulch Trotters cleaning up the rest of this main stage area, and then they will start heading over likely to Maiden, while Marsy on the left hand of the screen has now pulled some of those ushers along with this big pull.
I mean, you're seeing here actually pulling in the ushers quite a bit with a lot of these extra mobs here. Be quite dangerous to actually deal with, but Free Marsy is taking just a little bit slower with clearing up the audience, whereas Gulch Trotters pull the entirety of it along with an extra usher.
I mean, those ushers do add a fair bit of percent. Each one of these mobs gives really fractional percent. As we said, there's a ton of trash in here, and it's really difficult to increase that percentage on it. You'd have to do a lot of these massive pulls, which is why it's so dangerous with the necrotic for the tank. But both teams doing a really good job of having the tank kite when it just gets just a bit out of hand. We did see Brath, of course, earlier pop that perg, but it wasn't too bad right before the Opera event. They managed to survive, picking up the rest of these ushers. Now Free Marsy on the left hand, whilst Gulch Trotters working their way into that main balcony area. And I do assume, of course, they will take that left turn and head down to Maiden's Hall.
That's right, and just making sure that they're able to get, all these mobs in together. Interesting to see with Free Marsy where they're, taking care of these two ushers, and they have to be dealing with two more immediately afterwards. Gulch Trotters, on the other hand, actually ended up pulling those ushers into the entire audience. That way they'd be able to, go right afterwards into taking the next two ushers into some more of the trash packs right before they're dealing with Maiden's room here. So Gulch Trotters here moving on, like you said, towards Maiden. Very, very important to make sure you're kind of getting ahead of these mobs as best you can, getting behind, a line of sight to be able to bring in all these archers here right before they engage the boss.
Jack, I do believe it's pronounced it's Ursher, if I'm not mistaken. Gulch Trotter is grabbing all of that trash, some of it quite dangerous as well. You do have to watch out for the shield slam frontal. It will stun players, and hopefully these tanks aren't like me and like to purposely face it into the melee and stun them and blame them for not moving. But there's also this dangerous cast with a lot of the combo spells that will essentially one-shot you with the amount of shadow damage coming out of some of the cursed mobs. They do handle it well. The beam does big work for them. Chompy's beam, of course, coming down from the balanced Druid. Now let's talk a bit about Maiden here. We do have to watch out for a few abilities. There's a tank nuke that you want to interrupt. There is a consecrate cast on one player, 2 per phase, which we'll discuss the second phase in just a moment, whereas we see Chompy running over to the side, dropping the consecrate, I'm not concentrating apparently. And lastly, the players, as you can see, are very well spread out in a square or diamond, if you will, around the Maiden to make sure that they don't chain the Holy Bolt together too much, Jack.
Yeah, and the Holy Bolt there can be just such a pain to be able to deal with. And one of the scary things they also have to watch out for as they're dropping, again, that you said, the consecration, making sure when they're moving back into position that they're still keeping, that 3 to 5 yard distance between their other fellow party members, making sure that they're getting away from each other and not accidentally chaining onto that Holy Bolt, because the first person hit by it really won't take too much damage, about half their health in damage. The next target, always going to be near one shot.
And the third target would definitely be a one-shot, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the Maiden, after 2 casts, will gain the shield that we're seeing on Gulch Trotters now. She will start her cast, the Holy Wrath. If she gets that cast off, it basically kills the entire group. So you want to make sure that you have enough damage to break through her shield and interrupt that cast as late as possible to kind of get some of that free DPS time without the boss doing any of the mechanics. Gulch Trotters doing well to do that, moving the next Consecrate to the side. Free Marsy, of course, on the left side of the screen, working their way towards that area as well.
And you're seeing here with Gulch Trotters making sure that they're able to still have that distance there. You're seeing Chompy, for example, standing right next to his other consecration there. They're able to just easily dip into the consecration before the Mass Repentance goes out. Mass Repentance just is that disorient effect that you need to take some sort of damage to be able to break out of it. So the only damage left available that will be guaranteed to them is going to be, of course, taking that dot damage from the consecration, which can put quite a bit of stress onto the healer to make sure they're topping off, because it does last a very long time.
Gulch Trotters doing well to finish off Maiden. Will be now running as quickly as they can back down the hall to the balcony, likely jumping off into the corner of Moroes' room. A lot of trash in there as the dinner guests are happily feasting down in Moroes' room. We'll, of course, be disturbing them horribly by killing them and making sure that they pull some of the blueberries around the side of the room, as we'll see in a moment. Those, of course, those arcane wardens, and getting as much space as possible in the room, especially, Jack, because the healer does need some space to maneuver depending on which dinner guests are active.
As you're saying, bringing in these elementals, bringing in these blueberries, as you called them, they will deal quite a bit of damage with a lot of the little pools that are the void zones that are on the ground there. Very important to make sure you're just standing out of those, but you also will, of course, have the rings that will be spawning onto different players that will be splashing onto each other. Very important, again, like we said, when you're in this double melee comp, making sure you're not splashing onto everybody else. And you are seeing, of course, Shape going down here, standing in one of the void zones. You're seeing Skylar having so much necrotic stack going into Purgatory. A full wipe here coming out from all these mobs, and it's so hard to be able to deal with these because unfortunately you're not able to get all these slows and stuns off onto these elementals. They are just having that full team wipe there, getting the reset and trying again.
And unfortunately, Gulch Trotters were uninvited dinner guests, and they were denied entry to the party. They will have to release and make their way back down to Moroes' room. They did manage to kill most of the trash in there, albeit the guests don't have much health, but a lot of those wardens are still alive. Looks like they're maybe having some issues with the releasing right now. Free Marsy still working over as well. Actually, they've had some issues too.
Yep, and you're seeing here, I believe that they're just having more of their team members going down, as we're going to see if we're going to be able to get these people to be able to, it looks like they may have just disconnected, be able to see if they're able to get them back online and be able to get them back in here.
We don't know, unfortunately, as we had to cut the broadcast short yesterday. There are some issues with some of the internet in the Australia region right now, so we're just waiting to see what's happening with that.
Yep.
Trying to figure out what's happening here. Of course, I think both the teams had similar issues at the same time. We saw wipes simultaneously between the two teams, so we're trying to figure out what the best solution is. I mean, honestly, since both of these guys were, wiping at the exact same time, maybe there's a chance we can continue the dungeon. We'll have to see what the administrators decide here, but definitely Gulch Trotters had the advantage on their pick there. They were quite far ahead, almost an entire boss there.
I want to say it's probably not so much that they tried to, counter the other team with their pick and their affix pick, as much as this was just a comfort pick for them, and they clearly showed it. They practiced it well. Both teams had pretty similar strategies coming up, but Gulch Trotters was just executing fabulously.
Gulch Trotters had some crazy pulls, actually. Like when they finished the first boss and they went down under the stage, they pulled basically 2 entire rooms, and then when they were moving into that third boss room as well, like they were pulling like all the guests and everything, and they were just executing like on the Grievous especially well, right? They had the perfect kiting and their DPS. I mean, we saw one drop at the end there. It's probably due to the lag that we were mentioning that we also occurred yesterday, but I mean, overall their execution on those pulls was flawless.
And that was one of the things you wanted to see when you're taking an affix like Necrotic, when you're choosing to go into that, making sure you're having that proper execution. I really like what they were doing with the ushers, for example, as they were going into the audience, making sure they're able to deal with the Ushers. But it does look like we're going to be able to get back into the game here. Gulch Trotters, again, getting the last of these elementals taken down and getting themselves ready up for Moroes.
Yeah, so we did have a pretty fair wipe situation on both sides. You know, it didn't affect too much their dungeon progression, so we're choosing to kind of pick it up where they were. Gulch Trotters now getting ready, as you mentioned, Jack, to pull Moroes. Important on Moroes is the dinner guests that are active and surrounding Moroes will actually buff the rest of the party for damage, and I believe haste, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So you do want to CC some of the mobs as we're seeing right away. Some of them more dangerous than others, of course. We see Millstripe come in and we see Druger come in as well. Millstripe, you want to make sure you interrupt constantly. Trompy getting some good damage in on the side, and we immediately see that bop come on Tech Monk. Really well done by the Holy Paladin to make sure that Tech Monk can sit there while Druger is whirlwinding on top of him.
Yeah, but a huge healing requirement coming out of here, having to deal with the Druger's Iron Whirlwind, and just deals so much damage in that large radius here. So a lot of pressure being put onto the Paladin there, as you're seeing his Holy Avenger going down, making sure he's able to get the, this entire party taken care of there. But it's nice to be able to deal with that early on, because they eventually have to be dealing with these mobs anyway, because they're not able to have, one of the permanent CCs to be taken care of. So right as they're taking down Druger, they're moving on to Darius there, making sure, again, like I said, getting them focused down, being able to deal with these mechanics quickly, easily, and effectively.
Yeah, and it's really important to kill a lot of the dinner guests here really quickly because of the necrotic that's stacking constantly on the tank. You only have small windows to get away from Moroes, excuse me, as he just jumps to several targets and does one target at a time and does apply that growth. That's a prime time for the tank to get away. Of course, if there's another dinner guest mailing in the meantime, he will not be able to reset that necrotic. We do see that they kind of bait the whirlwinds out to the side, moving away from those weapons. Meanwhile, Farron's coming down, Jack, and that's probably the most dangerous dinner guest of them all.
Yeah, but you're seeing here, Dag is doing a great job being able to deal with the growth stacks here. One of the nicest things when you are having a Holy Paladin to be able to get in here is you're able to, get rid of a number of these different growth stacks that do go out. Unfortunately, the Blessing Protection was already used at the very, very start of the pull onto one of the melee to kind of reduce the damage that you're taking there. But with a Paladin, you're always going to be hit with the Garrote first, so you are able to, if you're not going to be using your Blessing Protection on anybody else, you are able to, take the first stack of Garrote, remove it right before the next stack goes out, the next Vanish goes out. Moroes will see that you as the healer do not have a stack of Garrote. You will try to reapply it and be unsuccessful because you have Divine Shield active. And then you do the same thing, taking the third stack of Garrote and then removing it just before the fourth stack goes out, and he will try to reapply it, but you'll have Blessing Protection to be able to save you there. So it puts a lot less pressure on the healer there.
Now, there's a neat little strategy, Jack, here coming out of Gulch Trotters right now. They're kind of going back and forth across the room as a group to make a guaranteed good bait on Crispin, as he will always be targeting that ranged target, Chompy, excuse me, here in the meantime. You can see he does that Will Breaker in his direction. Everybody is already well beyond Farron's, and he's sticking really close to Farron's. As soon as he casts that Will Breaker, he just takes a couple steps forward, and he is free and making sure he's not get it. So really, really nicely done there by Gulch Trotters. Free Marsy working on killing a lot of those dinner guests in the meantime to even have access to Moroes in the first place. Gulch Trotters now heading down to the stable area where Attumen resides, the final boss of the dungeon.
Yeah, but you're seeing here as they're going down the stairs, moving on to Attumen here. The great control, you really can't stress this enough, the great control that they're showing over Moroes, making sure they're dealing with all the mechanics as easily as possible, and making sure, like you were saying, a lot of times it's really nice to be able to deal with that, taking down the Will Breaker there early on to be able to make sure that nobody's going to be cleaved down by it. But they were just saying, hey, we have good control over this. We know, for example, having just one ranged player, it's always going to be going on to them. We know where we want to be aiming it. We know where we want to be avoiding it, and not really getting lost into the confusion there that Moroes can really bring you. When you have so many different mobs, so many different abilities that are going out, it can be easy to kind of get lost with that and just kind of succumbing really to all those extra mechanics.
Gulch Trotters, of course, rudely interrupting the Chargers from eating there just to say hello as they move down to the stable area for Attumen. A lot of trash down here, and of course, you can pull the boss, but as soon as you pull the boss, it will aggro the entire stable area. But we have seen a lot of the Chinese teams last week do that, so we might expect to. We're actually not seeing a similar pull where they did actually on purpose aggro Attumen and then kite everything out of the room and just kill it all in one big chunk. Gulch Trotters opting to play it a bit more safely here. Chompy, unfortunately, getting chunked right outside the door. There's a lot of dangerous damage on this trash, including that fire debuff for the circle we just saw, opting to use that battle res and get him up right away.
Yeah, and the AoE damage that can go out from a lot of these stable hands there, you just deal so much focused damage here, as you're seeing, even one stack is able to drop them very, very low. You're getting 2 or 3 stacks going out. It doesn't look like the healer is able to just be able to top them off in time. You're seeing 2 more deaths there coming out. He's just so lethal to deal with that Skylark is just now forced to kite.
Doing well, actually, there to help the tank reset. They did use the Typhoon to the corner as the tank kited the opposite corner of this room, dropping those necrotic stacks prior to the ads reaching him. In the meantime, Shape and Tech Monk have had to release all the way from upstairs and run back down to the stable, so they will be 3-manning the rest of this trash for now. Do well to do it and are waiting for their allies to rejoin them.
You've been seeing here on left side of your screen, Free Marsy is engaging with Moroes. They've gotten down to 65%. And at this point, they've taken care of Crispin there, just moving on to the boss itself. And they've done a very, very good job to be able to deal with these constant Garrotes. Thankfully, we're not in a situation where we're dealing with Grievous on Moroes and having the double, the Garrote and the Grievous damage going out. So it's a lot easier on them to be able to deal with. And of course, you're just kind of staying spread here, because they do still have to deal with Millstripe and just have those constant kicks on like the little smites that are going out from her.
Justice indeed being served for dinner over on the left side for Free Marsy. Gulch Trotters slowly working their way around the room, working up to Attumen to pull the final trash back. I believe they should, I think they'll reach probably 100% by the time they pull Attumen here. We do know that there are some teams that opt to actually not do some of the trash, deal with Attumen, and then go upstairs right after Attumen and just do a mass pull, finishing off the rest of the trash. I think they'll be okay here with the remaining 7% between these two packs. That is about, I think, 10 mobs altogether.
Yep, and you're seeing as they're taking care of the rest of the mobs, Free Marsy here really just has to pony up and get back into the game as they're taking down Moroes at 18%. And they need to be able to move back into Attumen's room, be able to clear out so much more of the trash. And the Gulch Trotters here just need to be able to play cleanly, safely as they're going on to Attumen. And you have to really watch out for those necrotic stacks. And this is kind of the disaster scenario, as you really have to be kiting out as best as you can as a tank. You're seeing Purgatory going off there. And you're in the situation where the tank's trying to kite out and still dealing with that ticking damage from necrotic and just completely unhealable. It'd be such a pain as a healer to actually get them topped off and get them into a safe position.
Chompy doing well to go into bear form and then use that dash in cat form. Jack, you're gonna have to call a full play on that horrible pun he just made earlier. They do finish off the rest of the trash and will be rearing up to pull Attumen in just a moment. Nothing too scary on Attumen alone, but we are in that fortified setting, and probably one of the most important things we need to talk about outside of the spectral horse lines that will kill someone likely is, of course, his shared suffering.
The shared suffering is going to be the requirement, the big tank nuke that goes out that will offer you the ability to split the damage if you like, or if you would. To be able to split the damage that goes out onto the tank. But of course, you do have to be dealing with the Mortal Strike that Attumen will put out onto them. So, especially when you're having the Blood Decay, rotating through different cooldowns, using different defensive trinkets there. We've seen Agrimars, for example, being very, very useful to be able to just completely absorb one big hit.
We do see that Bloodlust come up right away as Attumen dismounts Midnight, wanting to make sure that they kill him or get as close to killing him as possible before remounting, which happens when Midnight reaches 100% health at the bottom of your screen. Attumen down to 50%. Now, there's a bit of RNG involved with whether or not that Mortal Strike would hit. RNG, of course, something we're not used to in this expansion. If it does hit, the tank will have 50% max health debuff, and it will make it all the harder to solo that shared suffering. Team does well to get Attumen down to 6%, 5%. They're already in the safe zone where Midnight will not remount. Midnight, now being alone, will get a buff that increases her damage done by 100%, but also increases damage taken by 100%. And it looks like we're having a bit of issue with Free Marsy on the left side of the screen with that pull.
It was looking at, like you were saying, they were pulling everything into Attumen. They were trying to be able to get as much of the trash eliminated, and they were just getting absolutely destroyed and trampled over by Attumen. As you're seeing, Gulch Trotters is cleaning up Attumen. 100% trash. Just a fantastic dungeon by them.
Yep, well played by Gulch Trotters, able to tie up the series 1-1. And I mean, I think they had 15 deaths, but when you consider the Telstrated way, we were, of course, just allowing the teams to make sure that any issues that were lingering from last game have been resolved. Hopefully, we will have a clean run here as we head to the Cathedral of the Eternal Night.
Jack.
Starting in salute. Hello.
Fancy meeting you here yet again.
Right here in the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. On the left side of your screen, you have Free Marsy, followed by Gulch Trotters on the right side. Again, you're going to be seeing more identical pulls coming out of here, making sure they're getting a lot of these mobs tightly in together. You'll be seeing, of course, the mini-boss being pulled just a little while later. That is Dulzak.
Gulch Trotters with a much larger pull on the right side of their screen here. We do see Free Marsy with a similar large pull. The mini-boss, this is one of those pulls right off the get-go in the dungeon, both teams popping their bloodlust. That is really going to make or break just from the very start of the dungeon. We do have the bigger pull from Gulch Trotters. They'll have more to deal with, doing well, of course, to kite around. Keep in mind, we do have this Sanguine now. So with Sanguine, nothing too dangerous, but you want to make sure you're constantly moving as we see this backpedaling well done from Skylark on the right side with Gulch Trotters, because if a mob does park, or an enemy does park in some of that Sanguine, they will be healed 5% per second while staying in there, and they do stack. And of course, players will get damaged while staying in there as well, Jack.
I mean, that was one of the nice things you were seeing as that Shadow Wave was coming out for Dulzak on the side of Gulch Trotters. They were continuously kiting out those mobs, making sure that once Dulzak completed his cast, he would immediately just blitz his way across. And you're seeing, a really nice, skip coming out of here by Zerace for Team Free Marsy. And again, talking about those little extra strategies that they're going to be able to run, skipping past a lot of this extra trash. While this entire pull has been going going on for Team Free Marsy. Zerace is just up top, getting ready to res them and getting in a good position.
Yeah, so we do have a huge skip coming up from Free Marsy. Really clever of them. There is a 100-yard radius, of course, on this mass res coming up from Zerace. So well practiced by them. They do know exactly where they need to be in position to be in range of that. Skip the entire bottom floor. The problem here, Jack, of course, is if they do have a wipe, the only checkpoint is right back at this dungeon, and they skipped an immense amount of trash that they're going to have to make up later in the dungeon. Really big pull coming in here for Free Marsy as well, right before Aggronox.
And that's one of the things that you said, at this point, they are really all in. They need to make sure that they are getting these pulls down perfectly because they are already, putting in that little bit of deficit of those 4 deaths. But if they're able to make it pay off because they are getting closer and closer to the first boss, you really are seeing, it will pay off big time. You're seeing Gulch Trotters here trying to work on some similar pulls here. They are actually going to be having, some of the stealths ahead. I believe there was actually a little bit of an error there as the trap did go free and they had to get everybody else rezzed up. You're seeing here the patience out of Chompy, making sure he's able to stealth past these mobs, making sure he's going to be able to get ahead of them, and making sure, like I said, you're hugging these tight corners. You are able to go just around these mobs, be able to get the res on the other side.
So they should have the res coming up soon. Free Marsy getting ready to pull Aggronox, the first boss of the dungeon. Notable here is that they did want to clear some of these mobs to the side of the room intelligently to make sure that there's no sanguine in the middle area near that kind of fountain flower area. There's actually no water coming out of it, so it's more of just a little garden. Because they oftentimes teams will grab Aggronox close to this central area in order to try and make sure that they're get on the blossoms right away, those flowers that spawn during the boss encounter. You want to make sure that you can kite them well, group them up well. We will definitely see an AoE group coming out of that Blood DK during the boss fight.
And one of the big risks that you also have to look at is when you're seeing, for example, the big guardian that's right in the middle of the screen, having, the mobs splitting themselves around the garden if you're going to be on, the far side of where Aggronox is right now, or if you're going to be able to pull a little bit closer, you have to be watching for where all these mobs are going to be spawning, if they're going to be spawning right on top of you or right next to you. There's some of the dangers that you'll be able to see here as they're going to be going into this fight.
So as foretold earlier, Brath does pull Aggronox to that central area to see the first set of lashers spawn. They will be barking up the wrong tree as they filter in towards the players. You want to make sure that those fixates don't reach their current target, because if they do, they explode for a devastating amount of damage. Brath dipping quite low there as the succulent lasher spawns, which actually melees harder than the boss. Really dangerous mob. Often teams will try to stun lock that immediately as it spawns and just kill it before it gets too much of those succulent secretions out.
Those secretions indeed are very, very lethal to deal with, and they just offer a very, very large amount of aerial denial that they really cannot afford as they're just sitting right next to, of course, this flower bed. They want to make sure all these ads, like you said, are going to funnel into just one central location, make sure it's going to be a lot easier to deal with here, and especially when you're running with these double melee comps, you want to be able to have, a little bit of, cleave range. You want to make sure that you're able to have a little bit of breathing room really to work with here, because those mobs will be getting almost right on top of you, so being able to get all of them in close, getting them all stunned, or getting some of the slows going out there, giving you the opportunity to be able to kill them before they start running into you.
So no AoE grip used here, as I thought they would, but they do save it for litter trash, and that's as a result of their really good positioning here by Free Marsy. Dealing with those lashers as soon as they spawn, cleaving the first 3 right on top of Aggronox, and then just slowly filtering the remaining 2 through. Warlock likely using the ring for the slow there on those mobs, no problem for them. The second succulent lasher goes down. At this point, if the third one that'll spawn, they will likely probably ignore, and then just try to output as much damage on Aggronox and finish that off. Gulch Trotters, of course, getting ready to pull.
I mean, you're seeing, the trash differential that is, quickly rising here. The one that you have to also look at is also the deaths have evened out, as Gulch Trotter was just incurring a couple extra deaths to be able to get skip ahead. You were, of course, seeing, the Windwalker there for Gulch Trotters, having to have his death. That way he'd be able to be rezzed ahead instead of him incurring the 10-minute cooldown on his potion by using invisibility there.
So as we see, the third succulent lasher does spawn. They do punt it away as the tank tries to get away from it. Tons of damage that comes in on the tank on top of it. Do well here to min max as they pull Aggronox to the edge of the room, making sure that they save all the precious seconds they can with mobility. Unfortunately, RNG is not in their favor, as the patrols are not in a very favorable position. Players do opt to skip these. As you can see, they do wait for them to pad away and then get up the staircase.
I mean, they have a lot of trash that they really need to make sure that they're making up as they're going through here. Gulch Trotters here is working at 55% of the boss. And you also see, while Free Marsy is ahead at the moment, making sure that they're taking down a lot of the extra, or they do have a lot of extra mobs that they do need to be able to take care of, and a lot of these are going to be in this room leading up to the trash fight here.
Aggronox down to 43% for Gulch Trotters. Free Marsy now dealing with that massive imp pull at the top of the steps. Remember, they skipped a lot of the trash at the beginning of the dungeon. Luckily, they have now successfully killed Aggronox and have that checkpoint, as mentioned, Jack, at Aggronox's room. So they will have to likely pull most of the remainder of the trash in this dungeon. I'm sure they've well calculated it ahead of time.
Yeah, but just seeing they're trying to posture themselves just onto this far right side of the room, making sure they're going to get all of the the patrols in at that central location they can together. But there also will be that eyeball mini-boss that can just deal tons and tons of damage. So it's nice that they're clearing out these quick scavengers that will be just throwing books at you, and a lot of the books can just be such a pain to deal with. So getting them down quickly, making sure they're, for example, not going to be spawning any of the extra arcane minions, or just covering the ground in an AoE silence.
Right, you are. Books are for losers. We'll learn from the second boss. They have to be careful here. Of course, there's a lot of mobs, and you want to make sure you place the Sanguini, of course, cousin of Spaghetti and Linguini, properly on the sides of the dungeon. There's a lot of interrupts you have to do on the imp, similar to the ones in Court of Stars that will target a person if there's spell bows go off. They do a ton of damage. Clearing the room here first before dealing with that Gaze Rack mini-boss, that is patrolling the room in the area. He's an excellent pupil, of course, as he is in this library studying a lot of the books on the shelves.
Yeah, but they're trying to make sure they're staying out of the way of Gaze Rax's eye, and only engaging with him once, of course, they've got all this trash cleared out. There is going to be a huge sanguine puddles that have spawned here, so make sure they're pulling him to the side. Also important to note that you do have the ability to outrange, of course, his AoE effect if you're standing past that 40-yard mark, but you also want to be able to get this down as quickly as possible, because if you're not able to have, for example, boomkins or hunters that are able to stand past 40 yards and still DPS, then the Otis is going to be on you to have to just stand there, take as much damage, or take the damage from the boss. You're seeing darkness coming down, huge killing coming out as a race there, to make sure they're able to survive it and actually still get it down even quicker.
Gulch Trotters finding themselves in the same room as Free Marsy right now, doing a really big pull to the middle of the room with that AoE grip, but right away proccing that Purgatory, unfortunately, for their blood DK. We'll have to keep an eye out, make sure that they're safe, but a lot of sanguine going down. The boss, of course, is in a the mini-boss, is in a stationary position once he starts that channel for Gulch Trotters, so he is sitting in that sanguine, unfortunately, autocaster mobs. They have to be really careful. The AoE grip's already down, so they have to get some good interrupts, silences, and punts out as quickly as possible on these mobs.
And one of the most dangerous things you have to deal with Sanguini isn't necessarily the fact that it's going to be adding, kind of extra damage to the players themselves, but that extra health that you're having to deal with, just making things take just a little bit longer, can just be such a hindrance to your entire group. And one of the things you really want to be doing is just going through these as quickly as possible, and especially when you have something like Gazerax, which is you have to be able to get down very rapidly before you're even able to engage with that boss. When you're having 3, 4, 5 scavengers just dying right underneath it as one of his casts are going off and you're not able to interrupt it, it can just set you back so far here.
Free Marsy now starting on Thrashbite the Scornful, which of course is the son of Smash Spite the Hateful that we saw in the BRH earlier. Don't talk to me or my son ever again, Jack. Now you'll have to make sure that the charge that he incurs on one of the players, unlike Smash Spite, you can actually not intercept that charge. It will still pierce through the player, and the only way to avoid that deadly hit is to hide behind, or actually you can nestle into one of those bookcases. He will smash the bookcase instead, spawning 2 of those books that you'll have to silence. They will do some irritating things like slow you, but all the while making sure you get out of that boss AoE area and making sure you safely get to one of those bookcases is the name of the game here.
One of the things that's interesting, I find, Ted, is, first you say books are for losers, and next we're talking about nuzzling them. I think we should all embrace books here. As we're seeing, of course, Arrow getting affected by the charge again. They're going to be embracing quite a few books here, making sure they're getting those kicks out, getting them stunned, and Thrashbite is dropping very, very rapidly here for free.
Yeah, he actually innately has one of the lower boss health pools of the bosses that we see in these dungeons, just because of he's just meant to be a kind of really quick tank and spank, but high damage output. And what is meant to be, of course, at the higher difficulties of keys, kind of that, soft and rage check. Once you run out of books, you run out of books and bookshelves, somebody's going to get in trouble. Huge AoE grip here coming from Brat the DK. Players showing off a little here with padding, of course, about, we do have a death going down on Xerace as he does release immediately. Did they battle us there, or did he release immediately?
I believe he just released immediately.
Yeah, because you do have the checkpoint, of course, in the boss room that they just finished. Now, players are showing off a bit here. You don't really need to kill all of these mobs. They do head off. About 90% of them, except for one of the 5 packs, do head off and run into a portal, so they AoE grip and kill a ton of them there.
Well, one of the nice benefits, though, is that even though they do run off, they still do award trash percentage. So by skipping so much early trash there, they are able to make up for a lot of it just by, doing what they were already planning to do anyway. Get all these mobs in together and just nuking them all down, wasting no time at all to be able to get all that extra free trash percentage.
So perhaps not so much showing off as really needing it in order to complete the dungeon. I am even more impressed now. Thrashbite, in the meantime, at 1% going down for Gulch Trotters. They will be rearing up in the same room. Likely you'll see a similar pull as they are still at 56%. We do see the Blood DK run in. Immediately the Death Grid comes up, AoE stun, and they'll be AoEing all of those mobs down while Free Marsy working over on, of course, Nalasha, the Spider Queen.
That's right, Nalasha here coming in, making sure they're using Bloodlust here. They do have to be dealing with these Enforcers and, of course, the Orb Casters at the same time as Nalasha. Nalasha will, of course, be bringing down extra little Spiderlings that will be putting this very, very nasty poison onto the tank, so frequent dispels are, of course, going to be key, making sure that you're not going to be having any of your other DPSers or the healers engaging with these spiders before they go into the tank, because this debuff, this poison debuff does last quite a long time, and you want to make sure that all your dispels are going onto the tank and the tank alone here. So I love being able to use Bloodlust here because you have to deal with these enforcers one way or another. You're not able to just walk by them as you were seeing like Team Skyline D do with a lot of their shadow concealments. So being able to take advantage of just the Bloodlust here, the extra cleave damage, while the enforcers are just very weighty and annoying mobs to deal with, having the extra Bloodlust there to be able to just destroy them makes it so much easier on the teams.
Right, you are, Jack. Free Marsy now dealing. Now, the trick to Nalasha here really is that you want to make sure you're not too far away from her, so that when she does do that blink and targets the frontal on one of the players, you don't have to run too far. And because if you do have to run too far, you might be caught in that deadly cone that she does. Free Marsy finishing off Nalasha and her spider friends running up the stairs. You'll notice, of course, they are at 96% right now, but we do know that there's that 4 bat pack that will spawn after they kill the 4th boss before Mephistroth, the 5th boss, comes out. Gulch Trotters just now on the right side working to do the same and work their way up. Now, there is a differential of 1 death between Free Marsy and Gulch Trotters. This was Free Marsy's map pick, and with how close the 2 teams are right now, that 5 seconds could be a pretty big deal.
It could be, and you're also seeing as Gulch Trotters was able to pull off a very similar pull after Thrash by making sure they're getting that similar trash percentage. So they will, of course, be at equal trash percentage as they're going to be engaging with the 3rd boss here. And I like being able to see, Lust coming out for both of the teams to be able to deal with that Enforcer Nalasha combination, because you want to make sure that you're able to get those down very rapidly, because the longer those pulls go, the more spiders that you're going to be having to deal with, and just the more pain that really the tank is going to be having. But also with Dominatrax, if you're confident in your team's damage to be able to get the portal keepers down quick and easily, then you're not really going to be needing it there. And Mephistroth, a lot of times you should be able to be bursting him down as rapidly as possible and getting as few phases as possible.
So Dominatrax, of course, already being pulled by Free Marsy here, the 4th boss of the dungeon, does have a portal summon phase at 90 and 50%. We've already seen the 90% phase where he will spawn some small imps. Right now, the players do have to hide in that middle Aegis area. Hopefully, you don't take Aegis together, otherwise you will be killed and hit by the boss. Doing well, of course, to then kite Dominatrax close by to the shield in the middle, as the melee players then don't, and the tank, of course, don't have to run as far back and forth during that immunity phase when he does reach that 100 energy. He does do a huge frontal that you want to make sure you do not point at the shield in the middle of the room, as it will deplete some of its energy. Dominatrax now approaching 50% for Free Marsy, where he will summon 2 more portals. These ones, Jack, of course, being more dangerous because of those mistresses that spawn.
Having to deal with the Shivar that will be spawning from that portals there. So you might be seeing just a little bit of stop damage coming out. Actually, fantastic timing here, getting him down just before that 50% mark. Everyone getting into the Aegis there, and then very rapidly, not ages long, very rapidly being able to get that extra damage into the boss, bringing the boss then into that first portal, and then being able to just continue just dumping damage into these Guardians and prevent, and start reducing the amount of Shivar that will be spawning there.
Warlock doing well there to banish one of them on the side. Now, the danger to these Shivar that we keep mentioning is that they have that whirlwind ability, which will punt players away from the area. So you can imagine a combination, which we'll see soon, where we have that chaotic energy cast, the players safely run into the shield in the middle, but if one of the Shivar follow and punt everybody just at the wrong time out of the shield, it will cause a wipe. So they do well to CC and kill off any of the ones that are active, hide in the shield, and then get back to Dominatrax right away. Dominatrax now on Gulch Trotters on the right side of the screen, approaching that 50% mark.
And you're seeing, the nice advantage here coming out of Free Marsy. You were seeing, of course, that quick asphyxiate just before the Shavara died, just before everyone got into the Aegis, making sure it's staying sunned just long enough for for the chaotic energy to go off, making sure they're staying safe. Also important to make sure you're dipping in and out of the Aegis very, very rapidly there, as it will start shrinking in size the more that you're going to be standing into it. And it also will be reducing, not only the damage that you take, but the damage and healing that you're dealing to others. So it's very important, just as a healer, before you're casting any extra abilities, making sure you're stepping out very rapidly and getting the rest of your team topped off.
Yeah, certainly don't want to be parking in that Aegis in the middle. Free Marsy now dealing with that fell bat back, the Dreadwings, as we mentioned earlier, the remaining trash percentage that they require. These do a bit of a frontal that punts the tank, but you can actually move out of the way before the frontal finishes and avoid the punt entirely and the damage to the tank. As we can see, a bit of kiting happening here already from Brath, DK of the Blood DK on Free Marsy. Once these Dreadwings fall, we will have Mephistroth pop up, the final boss of the dungeon, who has 2 phases to the fight, and inevitably they will have to deal with at least one of the transition phases.
Yep, and avoiding those punts very well, unlike our ability to avoid any kind of puns here, Sloot. Free Marsy here, 100% trash percentage, 2 battle reses available here as they're waiting for Mephistroth to spawn. Gulch Trotters here, 7% there on Dominatrax, about to take it down, and then they're clearing up the last bit of trash before they're able to engage with the last boss themselves.
So, Jack, a lot of damage, a lot of splash damage coming in on Mephistroth. There is a debuff that go on players where you'll see 2 large green circles. Players will need to run away and spawn them away from the players. It does do some residual damage once they explode to the group, but if anybody's caught in that green circle when it goes off, well, then that's all she wrote. You will die. He does have a huge carrion frontal on the tank as well. It does hit pretty hard, but the tanks often, the damage that it leaves on the ground around is not too bad, so the tanks often choose to layer it, as we're seeing Brath do. He is just moved right of that zone and will dip back to the left. And of course, a lot of splash damage, as we can see the players well spreading out around the boss, making sure they avoid that. And then we Jack, of course, we know at 100%, he will cast his Shadow Fade as he does now, and we go into this transition phase here.
Yep, important to note with, of course, those spires that are just spawning right there, they will always be targeting ranged players. So when you're, of course, having this composition with, the rest of Druid and the Warlock, it's always going to be targeting them. But on the side of Gulch Trotters, because the Holy Paladin is attributed to be melee DPS, or sorry, a melee, you will see it, of course, going out on Chompy onto the Boomkin every time, but it might be going on just, either the Havoc Demon Hunter or the Windwalker there for Gulch Trotters.
Brath doing well to defend Illidan here because he can't see for himself, so he's making sure to defend him from all of these shadow bombs coming in. Anyone that actually connects with Illidan himself will make him extend the phase by an extra 4 seconds or so, increasing the amount of ramp-up damage that goes out on the group. Mephistroth now coming out of the shadows, returning to that first phase, and the players are getting ready to set those spires down, and once those spires expire, they will explode for that damage, as we discussed earlier.
That's right, and you're seeing, making sure you're having that constant positioning there at a Brath, and again, being able to focus all, the carrion swarms into more central locations there, and it makes it so much easier just to be able to have, that constant control and making sure you're not, running your melee all over the place here. And you are going to be seeing that light spread coming out there by Arrow and Retro, and making sure that, any of the little shadow splashes that are coming out aren't going to be splashing onto each other as you're seeing them going out right there. And it makes it so much easier and just puts, again, that extra stress taken off the healer there. Xerath has plenty of mana left available to him, just gets a quick Innervate off for his Wild Growth, relying on Sarah's Gift, Wild Growth healing to be able to just get everybody topped off as they're just dumping this damage into the boss.
Gulch Trotters now dealing with their transition phase. Always a wise idea to kill the images on one side of the room as to kind of funnel where the nukes are coming from on the other side. Mephistroth now going down for free Marsy, so there's 5 seconds for Gulch Trotters to finish the rest of the encounter. That's there's no chance, just not enough time, and our reigning champs will go on to claim the series 2-1.
Yeah, we didn't even give them those 5 seconds back.